Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on appreciating some backyard wildness. My name is Laura, and I'm an AmeriCorps member serving with Conservation Nebraska's Common Ground program. Conservation Nebraska's mission is to protect our state's natural legacy by educating the public, supporting communities, and increasing civic engagement, which we accomplish through locally led education efforts and community engagement projects to address local conservation concerns. Before we get started, there's a few housekeeping things to go over. Your cameras will remain off and you will be muted throughout the presentation. Please type any questions you have in the chat or the Q&A section, and we will answer those at some point during or after the presentation. This presentation will be recorded and will be uploaded to Conservation Nebraska's YouTube page within the next couple of weeks. So if you missed any part of today's presentation or would like to revisit any part or share it with others, you will be able to find it on our YouTube page. Following the presentation, we will have a very brief survey that should take less than a minute to complete. This survey helps support programming like this one, so we appreciate you taking the time to fill those out. If anyone in attendance is interested in speaking with a Conservation Nebraska member regarding conservation issues in Nebraska, or to find out more about what we do, I will put our email in the chat. Today we welcome Justin Evertson, who is the Green Infrastructure Coordinator for the Nebraska Forest Service. Justin also works with PlantNebraska. Thank you for being here, Justin, and I'll let you take it away.
All right. Wow. Thank you, Laura. I appreciate that. I'm happy to be here on a nice, what is it today? Tuesday? Tuesday. So I'm going to share my screen. We'll see if this works. Okay. Can you see it?
Yes, I see it.
All right. Let's do it. All right. Thank you, Laura. It's a pleasure to be here. I am Justin Evertson. I work with the Nebraska Forest Service as Green Infrastructure Coordinator, and then I also work with PlantNebraska. I've been working with these groups for about 3 decades now, believe it or not. I'm 60 years old, getting kind of tired. I was telling Laura I'm yawning up a storm here, so I got to get to bed sooner tonight, but we're in a busy time of year. Spring has sprung big time. It's coming on fast here across the region, especially here in eastern Nebraska. And it's fun to see what's waking up from long winter slumber. And we're going to talk about some of these things that are waking up right now that we can put in our own backyards so we can maybe appreciate and accept a little bit more wildness in our yards. So when Laura and I were talking about doing this, here's what I came up with, the idea of what we would try to talk about today. I apologize for reading this to you, but I think it gets to the heart of what we're talking about. The backyard wildness is about the idea of relaxing about the home landscape and appreciating a little wildness and serendipity, less fussing over the lawn, and a little more acceptance of what wants to grow there. When we tolerate a few dandelions, clover, violets, milkweed, etc., the yard will actually be easier to manage, less resource intensive, and more inviting to wildlife. The backyard is also, of course, a good place to trial a variety of purposefully placed native plants that benefit wildlife. And I'm actually going to go back a slide. As I mentioned in the start here, I work with PlantNebraska. That is formerly the Nebraska Statewide Arboretum. And as we talk about plants to put in your yard today, a good place to find those plants, some of the more rare native plants or some of the best plants to use in the home landscape are going to be with the Nebraska Statewide Arboretum. And there will be the Spring Affair plant sale coming up actually just later next week from April 23rd through the 25th here in Lincoln at the used to be the Lancaster Events Center. So go on out and find some of these plants we're going to talk about. But other things will come to your yard uninvited. And I think that's a pretty good thing, to be quite honest with you. And so for me, part of the challenge, I think, in landscaping, of course, part of it is planting what we want and growing what we want. That's fun. That's enjoyable. Let's keep doing that. But we also just need to maybe relax and appreciate some things that come along uninvited. Here's a few ideas or examples, like dandelions are really popping up right now all over the region. And people who love their lawns can't stand the sight of a dandelion, even though they're pretty important for bees getting sustenance early in the year. Honey vine and monarchs go together. Honey vine can look pretty weedy growing into some of our shrubs. But if you leave a little bit of it, you're going to be doing your part for milkweed, or excuse me, monarchs later in the year. It's a type of milkweed. Nettles go along with question marks. That's the upper right. Nettles are a shade tolerant plant that people don't like because they can cause that stinging sensation in our bare skin. But you can eat nettles. The nettle greens are really right now just right at their lushness for spring harvest and eating. And then be aware that if you leave a few, you're going to be helping to sustain things like question marks. And then really another plant that gets cursed a lot in the lawns is violets. Lawn lovers don't like violets in the landscape, but violets are really critical to sustaining various varieties of fritillaries, including our native, regal fritillary, which is endangered. Okay, there's no two ways about it. We are hard on the biosphere, we humans. I just don't know how to spin this in any way positively. I don't vilify humanity for causing these problems and the environmental challenges, because any animal exploits the environment around themselves for survival. But we humans are really good at it, and man, are we causing concerns across the globe. You don't have to be a hippie environmentalist to realize that some of this stuff is just not sustainable, and we need to do better so that future generations also have a planet to enjoy. And the evidence is mounting rapidly, really, on species decline. There's various reports out there that talk about the decline in vertebrate species across the globe, and also bird species, monarchs, and birds. Excuse me, I just said that, of course, but birds have been in decline for many decades, just the total number and the total species. So how do we think about that? I'm not exactly sure, other than to say we all can do something in our own yards and landscapes to try to make a positive contribution to the sustaining of these species. Here in Nebraska, here's just a few things that could go away in our lifetimes: the mountain plover, tiger salamanders, the regal fritillary butterfly, the northern long-eared bat, and then some plants like the western prairie fringed orchid and the lady's tresses, which is also a type of orchid. We don't know what we've lost when these things are gone, but we know it can't be good. And so we need to think about, how do we reconnect ourselves to nature so that we find value in these things and make room for them. And our own yards can be some of those places where we put value in them. Remember when we were kids and we loved to play outside and get dirty? Now we mostly look at our cell phones and don't think about it as much to get outside. And I don't vilify anybody for this. This is our modern society. We've all been brought along into it. So we have to work hard at kind of pausing the technology a little bit and getting back to nature. And our landscapes, in my opinion, certainly reflect our disconnect from nature. In these two pictures I'm showing you, these landscapes look very plastic to me, or lawn dominated. And to be honest with you, there's just not much wildlife benefit going on in either of these landscapes. Of course, there are insects and things that are alive, but these landscapes are out of balance in that regard, and there's probably more problematic insects than good insects in those landscapes. So this is just my opinion. I'll throw it here at you, that one of the moral challenges of our time is that we develop and promote a new ethic for sustaining the planet as we work to sustain ourselves. We're all in this together. Doesn't matter what our political feelings are. We all breathe the same air and drink the same water. We all have to eat the same kinds of food, and we all have to be sustained on this planet, the mothership of Earth. So let's work in our own yards to start making a difference. And here's 10 habitat-friendly landscape tips that we'll try to cover here going forward that I'll throw at you. First and foremost, Let's make our landscapes more biodiverse, our home landscapes. We can plant things to be purposeful about that, or we can just accept things that want to come along a little bit. We need to provide shelter, food, and water for wildlife, and that's not hard actually at all. If you've got the right mix of plants, you're going to have shelter and food. And then even with water, that usually comes along naturally, but you might put out a bird bath or other sources of water, so it's not that hard. Let's appreciate wildness, stems, logs, and snags in our yards. Emphasize native plants. Let's plant in groups with tight spacing and think in layers, so we're taking up a lot of ground with the purposeful plants we want, and we're not trying to mow everything. Improve and sustain soil health, and we need to really work hard at practicing more nutrient recycling. Leave the leaves. Don't haul away lawn clippings. You can make room for all of that right in your yard. You can have a compost pile and you can have a debris pile, and it can all stay there and slowly recycle itself to the earth. Relax about the lawn and reduce negative impacts on lawn care. Be very careful with pesticides. That's a growing and big concern across eastern Nebraska and the Corn Belt from agriculture pesticides, but also home use pesticides and herbicides. Let's be water wise. We've been in a pretty serious drought stress across the region for the last several years. Water is a precious and finite commodity. There's going to come a day when we're going to go, oh my God, we shouldn't have put all of that on our lawns. And then let's enjoy, engage, and appreciate wildlife. Here's what it comes down to. Think about this. We love the plants. Those of us who work in landscapes and gardening, we love the plants. But boy, do we, when we do it right, these native plants bring native insects and wildlife. And our yards can just be a really great place to get out and connect with nature without having to go find, some pristine natural area. We really can have some fun stuff going on there. Think about just the butterflies. If you have some milkweed, you'll have monarchs. If you have violets, you'll probably have some fritillaries. Look at these other butterflies, like the painted lady, which really is attracted to things in the aster family, or the red admiral. We talked about nettles earlier. That's a good one for the red admiral. The tawny emperor really needs hackberry to complete its life cycle, and so does the mourning cloak. The mourning cloak is an overwintering butterfly for us in Nebraska, and it's one of the first ones we see in the spring. And it won't be there if we don't have things like elms and hackberries around for it to crevice itself and survive through the winter. Beyond butterflies, there's other Lepidoptera like sphinx moths and hummingbird moths, or how about that Cecropia moth on the right? This is one I've only seen one time myself in the wild that I happened upon here in eastern Nebraska, and it was in some plums. But I do see on social media people run into these quite often, so you can't have Cecropia moths without a variety of native trees and shrubs. How about bees? Wow, bees are critically important to everything going on ecologically in our yards. Of course, they're pollinators, but they are really critical to recycling things in the landscape. And so mason bees, leafcutter bees, bumblebees, there are 40 or 50 species of bees that are critical to our landscapes. And then there are bee mimics like the hoverfly on the lower left. Beetles, one of the biggest families of insects across the globe that we don't often think about or pay attention to, and yet they really are important to all kinds of things, especially pollination, and then eating problematic insects like the lady beetle on the right is really good at that. Let's remember this, that the vast majority of the insects in our landscapes are either beneficial or benign. All of these things, the garden spider, the crab spider, the lacewing, the damsel bug, the praying mantis. When we see those in the landscape, if we're with somebody else, don't let them talk us into killing anything. The harder we work at trying to kill any one bug in the landscape, the more out of balance we make it. and the bigger the problem becomes for problematic insects. And remember, we want insects in the landscape because they are kind of the first trophic layer of life, feeding the other layers above it. And so insects feed the birds, and these are some of the birds that I see in my yard. I've really gotten into more bird watching here in recent years, and I'm just amazed at what comes to my little backyard in Waverly, Nebraska. All of these things, that brown creeper, or a couple years ago, the Carolina wren, I could hear chirping in the background all of a sudden. So we can see things we don't normally see around here. Cowbirds, orioles, waxwings are coming through right now. And the Harris sparrow is a migratory bird that passes through Nebraska, I think right about this time of year. I didn't see it, but I could hear it with my bird app a couple of years ago. All kinds of woodpeckers can visit our yards. And these are some that I've seen in my yard for sure. And then there's the big and the small, like the Cooper's hawk, which comes to my yard usually late winter, very early spring, looking for a meal around the bird feeders. So those other birds might end up being food to some of these predatory birds, but that's Mother Nature. And then on the right is that ruby-throated hummingbird, which I see pretty reliably every late summer and fall. One thing that I enjoy in my yard is a smart bird feeder that my kids got me a couple of years ago. Takes pictures of birds as they land there, and here's a cowbird on the upper left, a white-breasted nuthatch on the lower left. There's that red-bellied woodpecker on the upper right. Isn't that weird? They call that one red-bellied, and it doesn't have a red belly. And I was told that actually it's red-belled. Its head is kind of red, so it's the bell of the bird that's red. And then on the lower right, cardinals, usually coming in male-female pairs. I love it. Right in my own little backyard in Waverly, there's a kaleidoscope of things happening. Well, when we talk about what plants to bring or to accept in our landscapes, we do think about native plants as kind of front and center, and they really should be. It doesn't mean that our yards have to only be native. And in fact, a lot of native plants don't work in our yards. That's just the truth about life in the city. But there is a lot that works here. And when we think about our landscapes, we should think about the fact that Nebraska is at a crossroads of biomes. We have 3 or 4 types of prairie that intermingle across the state. We have eastern deciduous trees mingling with western Rocky Mountain species in central Nebraska. We have tallgrass prairie here in the east. We have northern boreal species up in the northern part of the state. And that means we have a wide palette of things native here to choose from. Take a look at some of these native beauties and plants. I'll throw a few pictures at you from last June when we were out in western Nebraska for Wildflower Week. This is a scene of Scottsbluff Monument, the national monument at Scottsbluff. And there was all kinds of things in bloom. You don't think about it as a place to come appreciate the wildflowers, but it is. Look at the loco weed. There's something called cancer root, which grows on the roots of other plants, sages actually. And then sandwort on the right. We were fortunate to be able to hike around Chimney Rock near Baird as well, and captured the day in some really beautiful sunsetting light. And boy, did the wildflowers shine, including scarlet globe mallow there in the middle. And then yucca or soapweed on the far right. You realize that it needs a yucca moth to get into those flowers, to pollinate those flowers and create viable seeds. Nature is cruel this way. And then south of Gearing, we stopped at a roadside where the shell-leaf penstemons were just blooming their socks off. What an easy-to-grow plant and a reseeder for our part of the world. And then there's milkwort on the lower right. That's a western Nebraska plant. Probably wouldn't get it to grow as well out here, but a fantastic plant for western Nebraska. And I'll just fly through a real sampling of some of the really cool native plants elsewhere in the state to think about for our gardens, like western purple coneflower, the switchgrass, upright coneflower, and purple prairie clover. Nebraska is prairie country, and we're fortunate to have 5 or 6 native grass species that work well in the landscape, as well as several types of sedges. One of my favorite anymore is the side oats drama here on the left, because it's just so drought tolerant and easy to grow, and only gets about knee high, and it'll tolerate even a little bit of shade. Then there's little blue stem. There's nothing more beautiful in the fall than our native little blue stem. They're not as long lived in our landscapes, but they are something to add and let be around for sure. Prairie dropseed on the lower right is a lower growing but very long lived native prairie plant with this nice arching habit to about knee high. And then here's some of these perennials or forbs or wildflowers that come from our part of the world, like the dwarf blue indigo, Baptisia minor. If you put that in your landscape and don't kill it off, it could be there for decades. Various coneflowers, including the pale purple coneflower on the left, and then the garden purple coneflower in the middle picture, supporting the yellow, why am I drawing a blank? Goldfinch, gosh. And then on the right, wild quinine, a plant that would mix well with any of the coneflowers. Milkweeds, we talk a lot about monarch butterflies, and their numbers are down, and they need sustenance as they fly across the Midwest, the Great Plains, into the northern plains and northeast U.S. in the spring and summer. And then they start a migration back to Mexico in the fall. Well, milkweeds are the thing that sustains the larval caterpillars all the way along. And then, of course, other flowers might feed the adults. But thank goodness we have various kinds of milkweed, including butterfly milkweed, common milkweed, and showy milkweed. Here's something I would tell you about the common milkweed. That's the easiest one to grow. That's the one here on the upper right. But here's the trick about common milkweed. If you plant it somewhere, it'll probably die. But if you just accept it and let it come where it wants to be, you can have it for a long darn time. Gay feathers or blazing stars are prominent across Nebraska, right in the late heat of the summer. I love it. Dotted gay feather on the left and rough gay feather on the right. And then when you get into late summer and fall, the goldenrods and the asters really start showing off. And we can have any of these things in our yards, right in our backyards. Easy to grow natives, and what a great color combination. There are some native plants that are actually considered reseeders or annual wildflowers that may not last a long time as just a perennial plant. But plant them in, they'll be around when you seed them into maybe a corner of your landscape. They'll be prominent for several years, and then you'll see them pop up here and there as you go forward, especially that brown-eyed Susan in the lower middle. I love to watch that thing work its way around my backyard from year to year. We don't have a lot of native woods in Nebraska, but we do have some important native woods, and we do have native woodland wildflowers, including these kinds. Bloodroot is blooming in my backyard or just getting ready to in my backyard right now. We've got Solomon's seal and wild columbine, and then also Virginia bluebells. That's just a few of what we can find here and grow here. And then ultimately, don't forget about trees and shrubs, especially shrubs in the backyard and in the home landscape. It's not always easy to plant a lot of trees. I did that in my yard, and now I've got a lot of shade. I can't even grow a vegetable garden, but I love my trees. So you may not have room for a lot of big trees, but you almost certainly have room for several shrubs. And keep in mind that the shrubs help take up space. They're easier to grow and manage because you only have to deal with them a little bit every year. And they're going to give you that layering effect from ground level up to eyeball level and beyond. So you'll have more habitat in your yard. And boy, is it our native trees and shrubs that really do the most good for us, including oaks and other things. This is research by Doug Tallamy. It's been out in the public for a lot of years. And look at these native trees, if we can include them in our landscape. So here on the top is the oak. It sustains 517 types of Lepidoptera, willows, cherries, cottonwoods, crabapple, remember crabapple, some of the maples, elms, hickories, and hawthorns. And then down here at the bottom, two of the trees we plant a lot of that actually don't do any good for Lepidoptera or other insects is the ornamental pear and the ginkgo. I personally love the ginkgo, but we need to quit planting the ornamental pear. And here's something else to think about. Many overwintering birds are actually eating caterpillars in the winter on our trees. And you say, how does that work? Well, there's overwintering caterpillars that are trying to live in the crevices of our trees. And the birds can find those. So those things all go hand in hand. Here are a few shrubs and some trees that I'll throw at you as pretty good and reliable for our yards. I'll start with the American plum. A picture of these plums I just took the other day near Waverly. It's a great year for plum blossoms. And when you get up close to a plum bush, you're going to be able to smell those blossoms. They smell like grape Kool-Aid. To me, that's a nice fragrance. So they're flowering now, feeding a lot of pollinators. And then mid to late summer, you're going to have plum fruits here on the upper right, feeding the birds. And then you even get good fall color in the fall. The plum is a little hard to use because it's a suckering plant that creates these thickets of growth. So you're going to want to have plenty of room to plant an American plum. They're also thorny, so they're a little hard to deal with in the landscape. But if you've got room, and especially if you've got an acreage, it should be the state law that you need to have some American plum on your acreage. Then there's other plum relatives, things in the prunus family. One of the easiest things to grow, and it grows great across the state, is the chokecherry on the left. It blooms a little later than the plum, and it'll put out edible fruits by midsummer, dark black fruits that we love to eat. Birds love them. And another cousin here on the right is the sand cherry, more of a central and western Nebraska native, but it can be grown quite well here in eastern Nebraska as well. Service berries. There are tree forms of serviceberry, and then there are shrubby forms of serviceberry. Our native serviceberry is on the right. That's a northern Nebraska native, and that's called Juneberry or Saskatoon Amelanchier alnifolia. That'll stay shrubby, and you can even cut it back to the ground every so often, and then you'll get these wonderful, delicious fruits by late May and early June. And if you have room for it, you can plant one here on the left, like shadblow serviceberry, which becomes an absolutely gorgeous multi-trunked small tree as it grows. One of our most incredible native woody plants, in my opinion, is the dwarf chinkapin oak. It grows down in southeast Nebraska naturally. And we're fortunate that PlantNebraska and Bob Hendrickson here in the picture on the left is a connoisseur of this plant. He goes and collects acorns from native populations every fall, and PlantNebraska grows them up and makes them available to people. So put one of these in your yard. They're going to be the size eventually of maybe a redbud or a crabapple, but you can cut them back to the ground and let them stay small. And if you have more than one, you're going to get some acorns that the birds love. Viburnums. I love some viburnums. There's probably 30 viburnums we could talk about, but one of the best is the Southern Great Plains native Blackhaw viburnum, which is blooming here in a few weeks, and then it's going to create these wonderfully bright blue fruits by mid to late summer, and then it often has good fall color. This can also be grown as a small tree if you desire it so to be. Hazelnut. The American hazelnut is native to eastern Nebraska, and it's a really attractive shrub in the landscape, a nice rounded, mounded thing, 5 to 6 feet tall, maybe a little taller. Gets good fall color. And this time of year, it's blooming with catkin-like flowers that will give us edible seeds, small edible hazelnuts later in the summer, and the birds and the squirrels will get after those and eat them. Or you can too if you can beat the wildlife to them. Here's a picture from a plant in my backyard. That's clove currant on the left, blooming yellow, and it's probably getting ready to bloom right about now. It's usually mid to late April. And you can, it's clove scent for sure. You can smell it throughout my yard, especially when the wind is wafting it toward me. And I just love that smell of spring. It's a clovey smell and it's fantastic. And you'll get some fruit set by mid to late summer that the birds love. And you too can gather these fruits of the currant and put them in jellies or jams or even fresh off the shrub. If you can beat the birds to it, then they have a good fall color as well. Be aware that there's several types of currants, and then they're related to the gooseberries. So currants and gooseberries, take a look at that, whatever you can find out, and make room for some of those in your landscape. Coral berries and snowberries kind of have a bad name just because they go by, well, their common name is buckbrush, and they're common in our woodland edges across Nebraska. For me, they are frustrating when I'm walking through them in the spring because they're loaded with ticks. But are they fantastic plants to have in your home landscape? Easy to grow. They'll create a little patch of themselves, 6 to 8 feet wide and round. You can mow around them to keep them in check. But as they bloom in let's say midsummer, you're getting good pollinator habit for mostly actually flies, beetles, and wasps. And then by late summer and fall, they're starting to set fruits that persist well into the winter and even now the following spring. So I have Chenault coralberry there on the left, and some of the birds are just now finding those fruits for their early spring sustenance. Coralberry and snowberry, add them to your landscape. If you've got a wet spot, something to think about is a pretty large growing shrub. That's buttonbush. It's named for its button-like flowers here on the upper right that happen along midsummer. These little Sputnik-like blooms, and boy, I don't have a picture of bees on them, but it'll attract a lot of pollinators. And then the thing to think about with buttonbush is it's really drought tolerant once it's established, but you can start it even in standing water. And there is a variety called sugar shack that stays smaller and will probably slowly grow to only 5 or 8 feet tall. There are lots of arrowwood viburnums. Again, another great plant for a wet spot. They're a pond edge species that come to us from Wisconsin and Minnesota, maybe northern Iowa. They love it wet. And look at that, they have great spring flowers, attractive blueberry-like fruit late summer, and then red fall color. And then I'll just throw a few trees at you. We're not going to spend a lot of time on trees, but let's think about trees as those overstory elements that give us maybe a little bit of food and sustenance, but also that cover and habitat for birds to nest in and things, other things to live on, like we talked about the insects living on oak trees. And so if you have only room for one shade tree, I would certainly look at any kind of an oak that will grow here. Two of our bests are the bur oak and the red oak, but all the rest of these things can be grown here without much trouble in eastern Nebraska. And then in western Nebraska, we should think about adding the gamble oak or the wavy leaf oak to the types of oaks we're going to plant. And they are fantastic for the backyard and our wildlife. As I mentioned to you earlier, crab apples are fantastic. They smell good and they bloom beautifully right now this time of year. Then a lot of them develop persistent fruits that will stay on in the summer and fall and feed birds over the winter and into the fall and spring. I just saw a flock of waxwings here in Lincoln the other day. Boy, were they roosted in some crab apples that were eating those fruits. One of my absolute favorite native trees is the black cherry. It grows in eastern Nebraska woodlands. It's a cousin of the chokecherry, but this is a plant that doesn't suffer out, and it grows fairly big, maybe 30 to 50 feet tall ultimately, if you can get it to live that long. And just like the chokecherry, it's loaded with these spikes and white flowers mid to late spring. And then it gets these racemes of these black purple fruits following that by midsummer. And the birds absolutely love it. So it's a plant, and it's also very important to various Lepidoptera, including swallowtails. Some of the swallowtails larvae feed on black cherry. So you got a tree that has year-round interest and color for the yard. And man, are you doing great work for wildlife when you have a black cherry. I love a pecan tree. That's a southern Great Plains native, into Kansas even, and it grows absolutely fantastically well across most of the eastern 2/3 of Nebraska. If you plant a pecan, you might get some seeds to grow on that pecan, but the birds and the squirrels love them, and you will just never beat the birds and the squirrels to most of those pecan seeds. So it's not a very messy tree by any means. We talked about layering and creating habitat that has various aspects for birds and wildlife to find shelter. And evergreens really are great for that winter shelter. And it can be everything from large growing ponderosa pine and concolor fir to smaller things like Tenardi juniper and the sea green Chinese juniper up in the center. Fitzer junipers are great for backyard habitat for birds flittering in and out of and giving them shelter from like a hawk or something trying to come after them. Okay, that was just a few trees and shrubs to whet your appetite. And we mentioned before that we're primarily promoting native plants, but let's be honest about it. When we are planting in cities and neighborhoods, suburbia, the native soils are long gone, and it's hard sometimes to grow native plants. And there are some of these plants, introduced plants, that really are greatly reliable, like Russian sage and catmint and sedum, lantana viburnum, common lilac, and that evergreen juniper I mentioned to you a minute ago. Those things are okay. As long as they're not invasive, it's okay to have non-native plants in our landscapes, especially if they're helping to make our landscapes more manageable and more wildlife friendly. So for me, it comes down to, instead of trying to worry about the 300 or 400 types of plants I can grow in my yard and making it a perfect selection, it's easier just to say, don't plant these things and then have fun with the rest of it. So especially these invasive species like ornamental pear, golden rain tree. Whoops, I lost that slide. Cork tree, sawtooth oak, Russian olive, autumn olive, Siberian elm, tree of heaven, the bush honeysuckles, and buckthorn. Don't plant those things. And when you see them coming up in your landscape, get rid of them. This ornamental pear on the far left and this honeysuckle in the middle are really eating away at some of our important native woodlands across the Midwest. We need to quit planting those, and we need to work hard at getting rid of them. If you want to do a deeper dive on invasive species to avoid, get on to the Nebraska Invasive Species website and poke around to see what are some of the problematic plants. So as we head toward the conclusion here, how do we put this all together with the kinds of plants we want to grow and include in our landscape? How do we arrange them, all of that? Well, here's where I always start with a simple suggestion for a more biodiverse landscape, and that is to relax about the lawn. We love our lawns. We work hard at it across the country, throwing at all kinds of things at it to try and keep a lawn perfect and green and golf course quality throughout the year. And boy, does that take a toll on our resources, our natural resources, especially the amount of water we consume in trying to keep these landscapes lush and green. But then we're also dumping on thousands of tons of fertilizer and pesticides, which have their own impacts and non-target problems to non-target plants. So we're, in just my opinion, we are really not doing this right. And I don't want to tell you a lawn is not valuable and that you shouldn't have a lawn. I have a lawn at my house, but I have a lawn that takes up maybe 20% of my landscape. It's fairly easy to manage. I only spray the weeds every spot spray in the fall, and I hardly ever do that. I usually just dig out the weeds, and it's been a fine lawn for 30 years. So it can be done. And part of it is just relaxing about it and thinking about the lawn as being something other than that golf course uh, quality thing of just one type of grass. It could be even a prairie planting like we see in these pictures. This is hard to pull off. I'll be honest with you. This can be not as rewarding to you as you might think because it does invite weeds and the neighbors might complain. But if you've got room and you've got desire, I say go for it. A couple of other prairie inspired and meadow lawns. You can do this. Just be aware they don't always look this green and lush. The late summer in the drought or in the fall, they might look pretty rough. And something we have to think about now with the threat of wildfire is you don't want burnable prairie grasses right up to the edge of your house in late winter or early spring. But some of these things can be done. These are pretty inspiring. Here's a prairie border out in Alliance, Nebraska, just utilizing our own native blue grama. How about buffalo grass? This is a fantastic choice for a lawn, especially in central and western Nebraska. Not quite as easy to do here in the east because there's more weed pressure on our buffalo grass lawns here in eastern Nebraska. But here's a picture from UNLE's campus, so it can be done. And then there are eco-grass lawns. People are starting to work into the idea of using lower growing fescues. These are shade tolerant fescues from a lawn in Lincoln, a mix of them that came from Prairie Moon Nursery. And so it's more of a meadow type of a lawn. And then there are all kinds of sedges that we're learning can be grown. We have many native sedges in our native woodlands and even in our prairies. So we have sedges that will tolerate shade and wetness, and we have sedges that tolerate sun and drought. And so if you get the right mix, you can work these sedges into your meadow-like lawn. Ultimately, for me, the simplest solution is just to relax. Be more accepting of Mother Nature's handiwork. So reduce the inputs. That means less mowing and mowing high, less watering, less fertilizer, less pesticides. Just it's that simple. Less. Do less of it. And then accept the existence of other mowable plants in that landscape. This is a picture from the park in Waverly, which I help do things for in Waverly. And I really work hard at keeping them from spraying these lawns. And when you look in close to them, there's all kinds of things like plantain and clover and black medic. Is that good or bad? Well, it can't be any worse than trying to fuss over a high maintenance lawn that we're spraying half to death all the time. A relaxed lawn is a polyculture lawn with a mix of mowable species. You can plant certain things that you plan to mow, or you can just put up with things that come along. So you could plant Dutch clover, yarrow, creeping thyme, and wild petunia. And then you could just let some of these other things exist, like wild violets, plantain, wood sorrel, purslane and dandelions, henbit, and prostrate spurge. Of course, nobody wants their landscape to just be nothing but dandelions. Dandelions look pretty bad by mid to late spring, right? And especially when they go to seed. But if you don't fight it too hard, you'll be surprised that you can live with a little bit of dandelion and not have too many problems. If you want to see somebody doing interesting work on lawn alternatives, go visit Aldersgate Garden in East Lincoln. That's a church. And the caretaker there has undertaken the idea of planting different types of lawn mixes and solutions across the landscape. And they divided them into three categories: A lawn, B lawn, and C lawn, by the amount of maintenance and inputs that would go into them. And they're learning a lot. So you'll see lawns that have a mix of mowable species. You'll see something called a B lawn. You'll see a more traditional lawn, and then you can go see how these lawns play out in the eastern Nebraska climate. And then let's just definitely rethink weeds across the landscape. Do you really need to go spray that thing and introduce pesticides or herbicides in the landscape? For these things, I would say no. Live with some nettles, live with some violets, live with some honeyvine. And then as we wrap this up, think about nutrient recycling. I mentioned to you earlier, don't haul away all the grass clippings or the leaves or the sticks or the twigs or the prairie grasses when they're spent or the perennial detritus. Leave that. Put it into your landscape, mulch it into the corners. You can even use it into a compost pile. You can make a debris pile. And literally, you don't need to haul anything away from your landscape unless maybe you had a tree come down or something and you had to get rid of big logs. And we should try to find a way to recycle it all in our landscapes. Here's a few landscapes that'll just show you how we're trying to think about this. This is the Wayne Park in Waverly, which I help manage a little bit. And so you can see these landscape beds are kind of weedy and wild, and that's okay. We even put up with things like pink smartweed here on the lower right that we did not plant. But if they want to be there, we're going to let them be there because, man, is that a good plant for bees. This is Lawson Park in North Waverly, where we've used prairie plants to really inspire how we're going to landscape. And this is kind of a tough look, a rough look in a dry year. I hear a lot of complaints from people about this. But once we explain to them what we're trying to do, they're usually pretty accepting because we do no watering and almost no herbicide spraying in those pots. Landscape we've been involved with for many years in Southeast Lincoln is the Fireworks Restaurant. We were able to help them develop a landscape to filter water as it flows through this bioretention area. And this bioretention landscape is a mix of wet tolerant and other native prairie things that help filter the water as it flows through. It doesn't look quite this good anymore, but it's been a very functional landscape for a lot of years. And you can go visit that if you go eat at Fireworks Restaurant in Southeast Lincoln. Karen Cresswell is a fantastic person. She's retired from her gardening work at Beatty Elementary in Lincoln, but man, if you get a chance to go see what a living landscape in eastern Nebraska can look like, a wildlife friendly one at a school, no less, go check out Beatty Elementary. I was actively involved in a lot of years for helping to plant and manage the Ferguson House landscape right across from Nebraska State Capitol in central Lincoln when the Nebraska Environmental Trust was housed there. Unfortunately, the trust moved out and the people that are in there now and managing it got rid of all of this landscape diversity and returned it to all that sterile lawn that they have to fuss over now all the time. And some of that's fair, to be quite honest with you. These landscapes require a level of maintenance that we have to think about, especially in public landscapes. And if we're not up to the challenge, we can create more problems than good sometimes. But in my mind, it's a trade-off of maintenance. Why can't we garden a little bit instead of running the mower and the string trimmer half the summer long? And then out in Scottsbluff, two landscapes which really convey this at the Scottsbluff Library on the left, and the Educational Service Unit, which created a bioretention bioswale that filtered runoff coming off their roof through this rock-lined channel. What a fun landscape to play around with. So in summary, the more biodiverse, the better. Shelter, food, and water. Wildness, stems, logs, and snags. We're going to emphasize native plants, right? But we're going to understand that some of the native plants don't always work. We're going to plant in groups with tight spacing, and we're going to think in layers. We're going to improve and sustain the soil health and practice nutrient recycling. We're going to practice smart lawn care. We're going to be very careful with our pesticides, herbicides and pesticides, okay? We're going to be water wise. And then for all that we talk about here, the most important thing is to get out there and enjoy it. Or why are we doing it? So get out there and appreciate it and be part of the landscape. If you want more guidance, the PlantNebraska, formerly the Nebraska Statewide Arboretum website, has all kinds of advice, including many plant lists and how-to for you to get started. So go there and visit that. And then, as I mentioned to you at the start, the Nebraska Statewide Arboretum Spring Affair Plant Sale, the PlantNebraska Plant Sale will be next week, later next week. And you'll be able to come see a lot of cool plants that help with landscape biodiversity. Sign up for the Shady Lane newsletter if you want. This is a newsletter I put out every week through the Nebraska Forest Service, and we highlight mostly woody plants, but a lot of these other things as well. And we let you know about upcoming events and webinars and things to help you learn. And so thank you very much for your time today. I really enjoyed talking about this. I droned on, and you have put up with that nicely. I appreciate that a lot. And I'm going to stop my screen share here. And let's see if we have any questions or comments. Okay, I've missed any comments about skunk bush sumac. I'm wondering if I should think my skunk bush will. It is about 10 years old now. And it's becoming slightly unmanageable for my small acreage. That's a very good question. And then he has sand cherry, chokecherry, and dogwood rose planted adjacent to the skunk bush. Wondering if I should consider replacing it with something more beneficial. Yeah, skunk bush is an interesting one. I plant a lot of the grow-low skunk bush sumac in our parks just because it stays small enough that we can manage it fairly well. But it is a trash attractor, and it doesn't last forever. Skunk bush sumac will want to die back after 5 or 10 years or so, and then you'll just cut it out and plant something else, has been my experience. There are different cultivars of skunk bush sumac to be aware of. So, and then the sumacs in general, be aware that some of them, like skunk bush sumac, stays as a sprawling shrub, whereas other things like smooth sumac or native smooth sumac are running around and coming up from the root system, so they're creating thickets and colonies. I love what you said here: sand cherry, chokecherry, and dogwood. The thing about shrubs, in my experience, they do add a layer of sweat equity maintenance that you're going to have to come along every so often and cut them back, some of them to the ground. If your chokecherries get out of balance, your gray dogwoods, things like that, you can literally cut them back to the ground and let them start over. Most of the viburnums we're able to do that with. So it just depends on your comfort level. Remember, the landscape is dynamic and it's always changing. And when we put them into our home landscapes, we've got to kind of do the part of Mother Nature that she would have provided fire every so often, and the buffalo stomping through, and some Native Americans stomping through. So let's think about it like that a little bit. Stock seed is starting to offer some really neat mixes of lawn seed. Yes, thank you very much. Stock seed is a great Nebraska resource. They are out of near Murdoch, Nebraska. And what's your thoughts on grass and clover? Yes, right on. Cool season grasses across Nebraska do have a place. So in western Nebraska, it's probably going to be more Kentucky bluegrass, but you can grow fescues out there. And in eastern Nebraska, tall fescue is a pretty good drought tolerant grass that we don't hardly even need to irrigate most years. And in both of those instances, I would add Dutch white clover to those mixes. That's how we used to plant our lawns before we started spraying them with herbicide. Just be aware that the white clover doesn't like shade. It won't last forever. And if you really work at that lawn, it might fade over time, but you can always reseed it in there. Yes, definitely. And so one reason we like clover, the Dutch clover, is because it's a nitrogen fixer. And that helps those grass roots absorb some of their own nitrogen, provide nitrogen for those grass roots, which also benefit, and then you need less fertilizer. Okay, what else do we have?
We've got some questions in the Q&A.
Okay. Yeah, our members have that our property can be part of my name. Okay, yeah. Can your property be a part of something? It can be a part of a lot of things. I don't keep up with everything, but there's pollinator way stations, and then other things. But the thing I know the most about is your own personal landscape can be a part of the PlantNebraska affiliate site network. And there's a special category for private properties. And you just might want to look into that because you'll be tapped into probably more information coming along for you. Take away bird baths and bird feeders because of the bird flu specifically for finches. Is that true? That's interesting. I'm just going to have to say I don't know, Samantha, on bird flu and finches. My hunch is those of us that are helping in the backyard environment, we're not contributing to the bird flu per se. I could be wrong about this. That bird flu is going to come and work its way through wild populations. And so we don't want to be naive about it, but we are helping them a lot by having at least something to drink. Now, the food part of that is something to think about. I personally like to stop feeding birds right around this time of year so that they start eating the insects more. And I usually don't fill the feeders after spring comes on again until fall. But I do put up a suet feeder because I just really love to see those woodpeckers coming to that. Can you grow Colorado bee balm in Lincoln? I'm guessing that is Colorado bee plant is what you're talking about, but we can grow bee balm and the bee plant, both of those across Nebraska. The bee balm is Monardas, and there's several types of Monardas that you can grow, and they're absolutely fantastic for pollinators. So just go to wherever you can find garden plants and look for bee balms that will do well here. And then the Colorado, the Rocky Mountain bee plant is something different. That's Cleome. And that's a plant that really likes it hot, dry, and a disturbed site. So they really do quite well in western Nebraska in disturbed ground. But you can put them in a wildflower mix here in the east, and you'll have some of them come up for a year or two, and you can enjoy. I have a silver maple, Samantha says, that has some damage. Is there someone who can come look at it to see if it is dying and decaying? You can contact your local extension office with that question, depending on wherever you live. You could send me a picture. I'd be happy to look at a picture for you. jevertson1@unl.edu, or consult with a private arborist that you trust. And I would trust a private arborist that is certified either through the Nebraska Arborist Association or the International Society of Arboriculture. How close should you plant trees and shrubs to woods, privacy fences, power lines, and poles? Very good question. Yeah, you need a little space there. So if you're planting a great big growing, let's say a black hog viburnum, you're going to want to be at least 5 or 6 feet from your fence. But those coral berries and snowberries I mentioned to you, you could be right up against the fence. So just realize how big that plant is going to grow. The big shrubs will get 8 to 10 feet wide, and then smaller ones are going to be 3 to 5 foot wide. So if that's the case, I would space smaller ones 3 to 5 feet apart, and the big ones 5 to 10 feet apart, depending on how many you want, of course. And then weave those herbaceous perennial plants around those shrubs. It doesn't have to just be shrubs. You can weave other things in with them. And then definitely do not plant tall growing things under power lines. But if you have power lines, this is where those large shrubs come in handy, like the black hog viburnum, crab apples, the dwarf chinkapin oak, gray dogwood, a lot of stuff that you can use under there. Is there a good resource or someone I could reach out to regarding consultations for an acreage? I would like a more natural landscape, but I'm not knowledgeable regarding where to purchase or what is appropriate for my area. Be aware that the Plant Nebraska does do some of that through the Bloom Box program. We can't help a lot of people, but check into that. Unfortunately, Plant Nebraska and the Nebraska Forest Service don't generally advise or do landscape designs for private properties. But if you give us a call or an email, we'll try to put you in touch with somebody that we're aware of. I'm aware of some pretty good private consulting gardeners that you can talk to. Gail said you mentioned a debris pile. Oh, wait. Okay, yeah, a debris pile. Is this for those items that we can't compost? Does it break down over time? Yes. So I have a debris pile where I put all my woody plants, twigs, and stems, things that I cut up in the yard that don't compost or break down quickly. I have a couple different piles like that in my yard. I do haul away, like I've had to take out big branches of trees, and a tree or two has come down. So I'll take a lot of that away. But if it's just twigs, branches, debris like that, I just let it break down where I pile it. And then every so often, maybe even move some of those twigs and stems back into the landscape and just let them break down on top of the mulch. It's okay to haul some of that away. You only have so much room. I get that. But try to take it somewhere where it's going to be composted or mulched. And that's one good thing about mulch. Like if you haul away your woody debris, your big branches and things like that, you can haul that away, but then bring back some mulch that came from somewhere else, woody debris that you're putting back on your landscape, and then you're contributing to that nutrient recycling. Does dwarf chinkapin needs 2 to make acorns? No. Actually, a lot of oaks are self-fertile, and you might have a very prolific dwarf chinkapin oak as a single plant. If you've only got room for one, you'll probably get some acorns. But one thing we've learned with oak trees is when you have more than one around, they share their pollen with each other on the wind more easily, and they produce more acorns. What are some good plants to plant in the health strip or curb strip that are less than 12 inches tall? Oh, that's a really good question. My health strip has trees in it now that are providing a lot of shade. And you know what? This is going to sound terrible, but a plant that works in there is ground ivy. I didn't plant it, and my neighbors, I'm sure, are going to hate it, but I don't have to do a thing with that ground ivy in that shade. Other things to think about, I would say things like sedum, buffalo grass, blue grama. I'm drawing a blank on things that are, catmint, excuse me, prairie petunia. And I think if you got online and went to the Plant Nebraska website and looked up some of the plant lists, I bet there's a plant list on that topic. And that's going to depend on, do you want to be able to mow it, just manage it by mowing it, or do you want it to be kind of a garden? If it's a garden where you're editing the plants and the weeds that are coming along, you could think about any plant that's maybe knee-high or shorter being in there, and that really expands the palette of things from asters to columbine if you have some shade, hostas if you have shade, some various grasses, sedges. We could do a lot of sedges in those spaces. I have a lot of sedges in my house strip. Okay, so did that answer most of the questions? Those are fantastic questions. Anything else, Laura?
I'm not seeing any other questions, so we can conclude the webinar.
Very good. Thank you, guys. It was a pleasure being on with you.
Thank you. Have a good day, everybody.
Goodbye, Laura.
Goodbye.
World.